Hey, my name's Andy, and you're listening to the Fishhawk Murders. This is the true story of murders that happened in my small town when I was a boy. It's a story of a horrific event that changed my life and the lives of people around me forever. Before the murders, Fishhawk was just like every other small town in America. I remember attending church potlucks, my Little League games, and my sister's gymnastic meets. My parents never worried about locking our doors. Children walked home alone from school, and we stayed at town parks way after dark. Fishhawk was a safe and desirable place to live and raise a family. All of that changed on one fall day in 2007. The tragedy I'm going to tell you about has been completely overlooked by history. Maybe this story went unnoticed because it happened in a small town, or perhaps because it took place in the state of Florida. Florida has a long history of saturating the media with crazy and bizarre stories. There's so many Florida man stories out there now, it makes sense that some news stories could get drowned out in all the noise. It's also possible that the stories of these killings was suppressed by local law enforcement or politicians trying to control public fear in the surrounding communities. There were also other popular stories dominating the national news at the time. In August of 2007, the country was following baseball player Barry Bonds as he broke Hank Aaron's home run record by hitting his 756th home run. An NBA referee pled guilty to charges that he placed bets on games he had refereed. And a Mississippi River bridge in Minneapolis, Minnesota collapsed, killing 13 people. The country's attention was divided. Whatever the case, the details of this event are so unusual, I'm astounded that they are not more well known. I was in 8th grade when this happened, and in Fishhawk, Florida in 2007, nobody was keeping up with baseball home run records or cheating referees. We were all petrified. All we knew was that there was a killer loose among us. It's all that I or anyone else could think about. Even to this day, many years later, the murders replay in our minds almost daily. Since beginning this project, I have spent nearly all of my time reviewing the evidence and interviewing the people involved, many of whom I know personally. Obviously, I'm using aliases for those who wish to go unnamed and to protect the innocent. We begin on a typical sunny and humid Tuesday morning in Florida on August 7th, 2007. At 8:46 a.m., it was already about 75 degrees out. A Hillsborough County Sheriff's Officer named Dan Murray, parked at a gas station in Valrico, Florida, receives a call from dispatch reporting shots fired at an altercation between two vehicles on Lithia Springs Road. The eyewitness reports seeing a black SUV shooting at a green truck. The black SUV left the scene and heads toward County Road 640. Officer Murray turns his sirens on and heads south down County Road 640, toward Lithia Springs Road. Even though the SUV and Officer Murray are on the same road, the SUV is also heading south and away from the officer. Lithia Springs Road is a country road that leads to the entrance of Lithia Springs Park, a popular swimming area. The drive takes Officer Murray about 15 minutes. Even though this area is near the city of Tampa, the area is actually very rural. The area is known for farming and phosphate mining. At this time, the area has yet to experience any of the growth it would see later. The two-lane road Officer Murray is traveling on is only populated by sporadically placed country houses. While Officer Murray is still en route to the scene, the black SUV involved in the shooting abruptly stops at a stoplight in the town of Fishhawk. The male driver and female passenger pull up next to a blue Nissan pickup truck that is stopped at the light on Fishhawk Boulevard. In the pickup is Sonny Minhas, a 23-year-old security guard driving home after working night shift at a local phosphate mine. His truck windows are down to allow in some fresh air. Sonny takes notice of the SUV pulling up to the light erratically, almost squealing to a stop. He hears the male and female occupants arguing loudly, the woman screaming at the man. The SUV's windows are also rolled down. Sonny grew up in Fishhawk, and he knows nearly everyone in town, and he doesn't recognize the SUV or the couple. Sonny becomes curious and turns down his radio to try and hear what the couple is arguing about. He focuses in on what the woman is yelling, and he hears her shout something about shooting a gun. When the light turns green, Sonny stays put and lets the black vehicle pull off first, and notices it's a Chevy Tahoe with Virginia plates. Sonny makes a left turn into McDonald's. Later, he says he just had a really bad feeling about the SUV and the people in it. He drives around the McDonald's and gets back on the road and heads in the direction of the SUV to follow it. Sonny calls his best friend Jordan on his cell phone. He fills Jordan in on what he saw and what he's doing. Sonny says it's only a 20-minute straight shot to I-75, and he figures if these people are up to no good, once they get to the interstate, they could disappear forever. Later, Jordan tells me he was not surprised to hear Sonny was following the suspicious vehicle. He said Sonny is a wannabe detective, not the serious law and order type, more like Reno 911. He's a friendly do-gooder, always trying to help out and solve hypothetical crimes. When Sonny catches up enough to see the SUV, there are two cars between them obscuring his vehicle. Sonny says to Jordan laughingly, "Hey, I didn't have anything else to do." Sonny admits to Jordan that he is probably just being paranoid. He says that he does not see the SUV speeding or anything. He says he's going to turn around soon and head back to McDonald's to get breakfast. Jordan is talking to Sonny from the convenience store where he works and tells Sonny he has seen several sheriff's cars speeding toward Fishhawk with their lights on. He tells Sonny he doesn't know where they're going, but maybe he should keep following the black SUV just in case it's somehow involved with what's going on. Jordan also tells Sonny to be careful. Sonny is about a quarter mile behind the SUV and about 5 minutes from the interstate. He sees the SUV turn right onto an unpopulated dirt road before reaching the interstate. Sonny finds an inconspicuous place to park where he can see but is hidden from others. He watches the SUV park and sees the couple get out and walk toward the LFI riverbank. Sonny describes the couple to Jordan over the phone as probably Latin American, young, probably in their late 20s. The man has dark short hair. He's about 5'10" and slender. He's wearing black jeans and a gray shirt with tennis shoes. The woman is short and skinny with long curly dark hair. She is dressed in blue jeans and a white shirt. The man walks down to the edge of the river, looks around briefly, and then throws an object out into the middle of the river. Sonny tells Jordan he thinks it could have been a gun, but he's not sure. The couple still appears to be agitated and is arguing back and forth as they return to the car. Sonny snapped a few pictures of the couple with his cell phone. As you can imagine, they were not great pictures from that distance, but you can make out the SUV and the couple pretty well. Sonny continues telling Jordan what he is seeing. He says, if they have anything to do with those sheriff cars you saw, they could be drug dealers. Jordan asks Sonny if he wants him to call the police. Sonny says he'll call the police as soon as he finds out where they are going. The SUV pulls back out onto the road and then gets on the busy interstate. Sonny follows. Sonny remembers that he needs to call his mom, who he lives with, to tell her he will be late coming home. He tells Jordan he will call him right back and hangs up. He then calls his mother and tells her he has some errands to take care of. Now back on Lithia Springs Road, Officer Dan Murray arrives at the shooting scene, and he sees a green truck stopped in the middle of the road. He parks his cruiser to the rear of the green truck. He gets out and walks slowly towards the driver's side. Through the truck's back window, he sees a motionless person sitting in the driver's seat. He stops short of the still running truck. He sees what looks like blood dripping out of the bottom of the cracked open truck door and onto the street. He calls to the occupant, "Hey, are you okay in there? Can you hear me?" He gets no answer. Officer Murray walks up to the back of the truck cab and reaches one arm in the window to touch the motionless driver. He pushes the driver's shoulder and calls again, and there's still no response. He takes another step forward so he can take a look at the driver, and he sees it as a young man in his early 20s. The man is unresponsive and is bleeding from his chest. There is a handgun in the man's hand, which is lying on his lap. Officer Murray checks the young man's neck for a pulse and determines he's already dead. The officer looks around and there is no sign of any other threats. He walks back to his cruiser and calls the homicide in on the radio. Then he starts looking around for any possible witnesses while he waits for other officers to arrive. Several hundred yards behind the green truck, Officer Murray sees a woman standing in her yard behind her gate. He walks over to her and asks if she saw what happened. She informs him that she is who called 911. Her name is Patricia Woodworth. She explains she was outside watering her plants when she heard the gunshots. She looked up and saw the black SUV and the green truck facing each other, as if they had been traveling in opposite directions and stopped to talk. After the shots were fired, the black SUV sped off back to the main road, after which she went in and called the police. She says she has never seen the black SUV before, but she knows who owned the green truck. She believes it belongs to the Johnsons, her neighbors who live up the road. Now backup sheriff cars begin showing up, and Officer Murray explains the situation with the young man's body and asks him to secure the crime scene. Then Officer Murray and his patrol sergeant, Tyler Lucy, walk over to the Johnsons' house. The house sits back off the road on a 3-acre lot with lots of very large pine trees in the yard. It's a 2-story white farmhouse with a wraparound country porch. It has large square pillars across the front supporting the porch's roof. The officers have no idea what to expect. They prepare themselves to either meet another threat or to deliver the news of a deceased loved one. They walk up to the door very cautiously, ready to draw guns if needed. They knock on the door and yell, "Sheriff's office!" multiple times before trying the doorknob. It is unlocked, so they push it open. They call out a couple more times with the door open, no response. From the doorway, the officers can see what looks like blood soiling the walls and floor. A burnt smell comes from the house as if there had been a recent fire. What Officer Murray and Lucy saw when they walked into that house continues to haunt them to this day. In Officer Murray's words, it was a gruesome, bloody massacre. They walk into the foyer slowly, and when they reach the opening to the living room, on the left, they see a naked, decapitated adult woman's body sitting on a recliner. The woman's headless, brutalized body appears to be staged to face the foyer to greet whoever enters into the home. Blood splatter covers nearly everything that can be seen. On the mantel above the fireplace is a burnt human head, also facing the entryway. The head is scorched black with burnt skin peeling off of the skull. The scene, along with the smell of the burnt flesh, sends shockwaves of disgust through the officers' bodies, and neither can remain in the house. They exit the front door, and it takes them both quite a while to compose themselves. The officers radio for more assistance and decide they need to stay outside of the house until it arrives. They request all possible resources to be dispatched to the scene. Once homicide investigators are on site and everyone is briefed, personnel go back inside to clear the home. The home belongs to a longtime local family, the well-known and well-liked Johnson family of 5. In addition to the young man found dead in the green truck, who was 21-year-old Justin Johnson, officers find 4 other dead bodies inside the home: Chuck and Amanda Johnson and their 2 younger children, Elizabeth 12 and Matthew 8. All 5 family members are dead. Officers find both Chuck and Amanda are decapitated with their heads burned. The children's bodies are found lying on their beds with their throats slit. All of the bodies in the home show evidence of brutal torture before their deaths. Now we return to Sonny Minhas, who is still following the couple in the SUV in his pickup truck on Interstate 75. He has been following behind the SUV now for about 30 minutes. There is enough traffic between them to keep him from being noticed. Sonny gets so consumed with tailing the vehicle, he has not noticed that his cell phone has died. Sonny follows the couple as they pull off the exit and pull into a Flying J truck stop in Seffner, Florida. The SUV pulls to the back of the building. Sonny pulls into a parking spot on the other side of the lot and out of their view. He sees the woman go into the store. He sees the man get out and go to the back of the SUV. The man starts to smoke a cigarette. The man is scanning the whole area while he smokes. Sonny bends down in his truck as the man's eyes pass over the area where he's parked. A few seconds later, Sonny looks back up and he sees that the man has opened the SUV's hatch. The man is rifling through bags in the back when the woman returns. She is on her cell phone and still visibly upset. The woman is screaming at the man while also continuing her phone call. She walks around the corner back toward the front of the store, and the man lowers the hatch to follow her. Sonny impulsively gets out of his truck and walks toward the SUV to get a closer look. Remember, at this point Sonny still has no idea that anyone has been killed back in Fishhawk. Sonny walks hurriedly toward the SUV. He uses other cars and people to obscure his path to the back of the car. He stops only a few feet from the SUV, which is positioned behind the gas station's dumpster area. He peers around the corner of the building and does not see the couple. Sonny examines the vehicle and notices the man has only lowered the hatch. It doesn't look like it is completely closed and locked. Sonny's curiosity overtakes him. He looks around and the coast is clear. He quickly lifts the hatch and looks inside to find several black duffel bags. One bag is open and it's full of stacks of cash. Sonny looks up and around again and still sees no one. He grabs the open duffel bag and 2 more, leaving the SUV hatch door open, and hurries back to his car, returning the same way he came. No one in the lot pays any attention to him. He throws the bags into the front seat of his truck, starts it up, and heads out of the parking lot. As Sonny drives away, the man from the SUV returns and sees the hatch open. He runs to investigate and notices the missing bags. He turns quickly to look around in all directions, and he hears Sonny's truck screeching back out onto the road. Sonny sees the man, and the man's eyes are locked on Sonny's pickup as it heads back towards the interstate. Sonny nervously speeds back to the highway. He gets on, heading back south. He gets off at the next exit on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. He checks the rearview mirror, and he's sure the couple is not behind him. He's ecstatic. He screams with excitement, and he feels proud of himself, overjoyed thinking he has just got the best of some Virginia drug dealers. Sonny takes back roads the rest of the way back to Fishhawk. He isn't sure how much money is in the bags, but there is no doubt it is the most he's ever seen in his life. Sonny drives back to the phosphate mine where he works and buries the duffel bags in an abandoned gypstack. A gypstack is a hill that contains all of the waste byproducts of a phosphate fertilizer plant. After Sonny hides the money, he goes home and says nothing about any of what happened to his mother. He puts his dead phone on the charger and takes a shower. It's only about 1 p.m. now. After he gets dressed and gets something to eat, he picks up his phone and he sees that he has several missed calls from his friend Jordan. He forgot all about calling Jordan back, so he dials the number. Jordan answers and screams into the phone, "Sonny, where the fuck have you been? How are you? Are you alright, man?" Sonny says, "I'm at home. I'm fine." "Dude, I think those people you followed this morning killed Justin Johnson and his whole family." Sonny and Jordan know Justin from high school. Justin was a local baseball star, a local sports hero. He was scouted by all of the colleges while in high school. He played 2 years of college ball in Georgia and was now the starting third baseman for the Tampa Manatees, a local minor league team. Sonny tells Jordan he is devastated by the news of Justin and his family. Hearing this news and thinking of all of the day's activities has weakened him physically. He's overwhelmed. He has to sit down on the floor for several minutes and is unable to speak. He listens as Jordan fills him in on what he knows about the murder so far, which is very little. Jordan does not know whether anyone has been caught. Sonny asks if Jordan told the police about their morning conversation, and Jordan says he has not yet. Sonny tells Jordan they need to meet up ASAP, so he can discuss what happened with the couple earlier. They agree to meet at 4 p.m. at the Fishhawk ballpark after Jordan gets off work. Now back at the Johnsons' home, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office decide the investigation is going to be too big for their resources, and they call in the Tampa office FBI for support. Lithia Springs Road is closed to all traffic. The park at the end of the road is also closed, and anyone trying to drive to their home on the street must pass through a law enforcement checkpoint. Once in their homes, they are instructed to stay inside. This is the most gruesome crime any of the law enforcement officers from any agency has ever seen. So who was his family that had been brutally murdered? Why would somebody want to murder an entire family? The FBI conducted a deep dive into their history to try and answer that question. I used FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to have the case files released. I have also done my own research talking to friends and family of the Johnsons. Both Chuck and Amanda grew up in the Fishhawk area. Chuck and Amanda Johnson started out as childhood sweethearts. They were married 2 years after high school. They both finished college in Central Florida before having their 3 children. Chuck was an electrical engineer and Amanda was a registered nurse. They had been married for 28 years at the time of their deaths. They had been members of the First Baptist Church their entire lives and still attended regularly. Mr. and Miss Johnson were leaders in the church. Amanda taught Bible school and Chuck was a mentor in the Young Christian Men's program. Chuck also volunteered as an assistant baseball coach at the high school. They were a popular couple and known to be kind and generous. Chuck's business, Total Design, was located on Fishhawk Boulevard. The company worked to develop and maintain electrical systems for new construction and existing buildings. With all of the growth in Florida at the time, Chuck's company was doing very well. He employed 3 other engineers. Chuck's company had a part in most of the buildings still standing in Fishhawk today. He was known for his honesty and his commitment to always deliver on his promises. Amanda worked at the regional hospital in pediatrics. She was a born nurturer. Caring for people she loved and for people who needed her was in her blood. She had cared for just about every kid who grew up in Fishhawk. and knew most of them by name. She often joked about not being able to get through the grocery store without being stopped by at least 10 worried mothers asking about their ailing children. She really didn't mind the impromptu supermarket medical appointments. She was kind. One of her favorite quotes to recite to her own children and Bible study students was to never underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, and a kind word. Chuck and Amanda's 3 children were Justin, 21, Elizabeth, nicknamed Ellie, 12, and Matthew, 8. Justin, as I already mentioned, played minor league baseball for the Tampa Manatees. He was a handsome young man, tall with brown hair, brown eyes, and an athletic build. He lived in an apartment in downtown Tampa with a couple of his teammates. He was engaged to be married to his own childhood sweetheart, Anne. He and his fiancée were planning to get married the following year in the spring of 2008. Justin often came home to Fishhawk to spend time with Anne and his family. He liked to spend time with his 2 younger siblings. Whenever his baseball team was in town playing home games, Justin would come home to sleep over at his parents' house. He and Anne would often take Ellie and Matthew to the ballpark with them. Justin still liked to practice baseball drills with his friends from high school. He was kind of a local celebrity, and often the practices would attract a crowd of younger baseball fans. Anne would sit in the bleachers with Ellie and Matthew and eat candy or ice cream. Often, once the older boys finished their drills, the younger spectators would join in for a game of sandlot baseball. Justin's dream had always been to play in the big leagues, and he was doing well in the minors, garnering some attention. He had told Anne that he was going to do the minor league thing for a couple of years, and if it didn't work out, he would finish school and work with his dad's company. Everyone supported Justin's dream. He actually had the talent and the resolve to make it possible. Ellie was a 7th grade honor roll student. She was tall and thin with blonde hair and blue eyes. Ellie had been doing gymnastics since she was 4 years old and was quite accomplished. She had her own trophy case in the house comparable to Justin's. She was a captain on her youth competitive cheer team and was described by her friends as the most talented and friendliest girl on the team. She was said to have a smile that would light up a room. Ellie enjoyed working with the newer members and teaching them the routines. Ellie's team was scheduled to compete in the World Cheer Competition in Orlando 2 weeks after she was murdered. Her team unanimously decided to bow out of the competition after her death. Her cheer team now gives out a yearly award in her memory. The Elizabeth Johnson Award goes to the girl who exhibits Ellie's qualities: kindness, leadership, and determination. The youngest child, Matthew, was a 4th grader. He was an extrovert and had a clever wit. There was never a boring moment while he was around. He was also athletic like the rest of his family. He played Little League baseball and his favorite school subject was math. He had auburn hair with brown freckles and brown eyes. Matthew was adored by his family and friends. This heinous crime truly made no sense. The FBI questioned their neighbors, friends, church congregation, and all of their co-workers and could not find one person who disliked the Johnsons. Thank you for listening. On the next episode, I use case files to describe the scene inside the Johnson home, the FBI makes an arrest, and Sonny's involvement continues. If you like this content, please follow, share, review, or tell a friend about it. Hey, my name's Andy. You are listening to the Fishhawk Murders. This is the true story of murders that happened in my small town when I was a boy. On episode 1, we learned about the murders of the 5 Johnson family members, and we followed a local man, Sonny Minhas, as he pursued 2 possible suspects. Back to the day of the murders when Sonny meets up with his friend Jordan at the Fishhawk ballpark as scheduled at 4 p.m. Sonny tells Jordan every detail of what happened earlier that day. Sonny tells how he took the money and even where he hid it. Jordan advises Sonny to go to the police to let them know about the couple, and Sonny agrees. Before they go to the police, Sonny and Jordan decide to go to a local bar to grab a bite to eat. In the bar, everyone is already talking about the murders. Sonny and Jordan sit in a corner booth and keep to themselves. They eat and have a couple of beers. Sonny tells Jordan he has recently gotten a passport for a cruise he was going on with his mom. He jokingly talks about heading to Mexico with the money and leaving the phosphate mine and the town behind for good. He says he could just disappear. Sonny is also worried that the money he took might belong to drug cartels, and they are likely going to come looking for him. He is worried the man in the SUV might have seen his truck following them, or seen him pulling out of the Flying J station after he took the bags. For good reason, Sonny's paranoia is growing. A couple beers turn into a few too many, and Sonny keeps going on about running away with the money. He also knows he needs to tell the police what he knows about the couple. Since the two men have gotten quite drunk, they make a plan for Jordan to pick Sonny up in the morning, and they both will go to the police. The next morning at 8 a.m., Jordan picks up Sonny. They head to McDonald's to grab breakfast on the way to the police station. At the intersection on Fishhawk Boulevard, Sonny spots the man from the SUV outside a gas station next to McDonald's. He sees the man pumping gas into a blue Toyota sedan. Sonny stays low and writes down the license plate and snaps pictures with his phone. The woman from the SUV is talking to some locals outside of the gas station. Sonny tells Jordan he thinks the couple is probably looking for him. Sonny is really scared and remembers his pickup truck is parked in front of his mom's house. Sonny insists Jordan turn away from the gas station and drive him back to his mom's so he can move the truck. They speed back to Sonny's mom's house. Sonny jumps out of the car and tells Jordan he is going to figure out what to do and call him later. Sonny jumps in his truck and speeds off toward the back roads heading out of town. He heads back to the phosphate mine and collects the bags full of money. Afterwards, he calls Jordan and he tells him he is afraid the cartel is going to find him and probably kill him. He decides right there that he is going to take the money and go on the run. He says he will probably head for Mexico and then catch a flight from there to somewhere safe. He tells Jordan to wait a couple of hours to give him a head start before going to tell the police everything. Sonny texts Jordan all of the pictures he took and the license plate numbers for both vehicles he witnessed the couple driving. About an hour later, the FBI gets their first break in the case when Jordan calls 911 to report possibly having knowledge about the murders. He meets with the FBI and tells them Sonny's whole story and gives them the car's license plate numbers and the pictures Sonny took of the couple by the river and at the gas station. The car was rented to a woman named Liliana Beltran. It did not take law enforcement long to track down the Toyota. The couple was still driving around the small town of Fishhawk. Liliana Beltran and Gabriel Morales are detained and questioned in connection to the Johnson family murders. Both suspects have long police records and are known associates of gang and drug organizations. When asked what they were doing in Fishhawk, Florida, neither of them provided a credible reason to be there. When the FBI interrogators explained a witness saw a black SUV leaving the murder crime scene and confronted the two with the pictures Sonny took with his cell phone, both suspects shut down and request lawyers. A week later, the abandoned SUV is found under a bridge. The license plate matches what Sonny provided, but the interior had been completely wiped clean. The SUV had been reported stolen from a home in Norfolk, Virginia a week earlier. Based on the information provided by Jordan and Sonny's pictures, the FBI estimated about where the couple must have pulled off near the Alafai River. They send divers down into the river and recover a gun. The evidence is piling up against the two suspects in custody. It is obvious to everyone that the two suspects are connected to the Johnson family murders, but there are still huge holes in the case. Neither suspect is cooperating with the investigation, and both are being held in a Hillsborough County jail without bail. The case makes absolutely no sense, and there are few physical clues available. There is no evidence that the Johnson family had any affiliation to any drug dealers. There were no unusual purchases, no unusual bank account activity. Their neighbors never saw any unusual visitors or traffic at the Johnson home. They were usually only visited by local family and friends. The FBI cannot connect either suspect to the murders in the home at all. No tire tracks on the property, no DNA, no fingerprints, no evidence at all that either suspect had ever been inside the Johnson home. When questioned about the murders in the house, Liliana and Gabriel strongly deny knowing anything about a murdered family. A park ranger who was working the entrance to Lithia Springs Park remembered the black SUV entering and leaving the park that morning. Unfortunately, the park does not have any security cameras set up. He says nothing seemed unusual about the SUV in either direction. The SUV had driven around the small park and stopped near the swimming area. The vehicle was in the park for about 30 minutes before leaving. Based on the information provided by Sonny and Jordan's story, the FBI concluded that there was most likely a drug and money exchange at that park. But there was no information about anyone else who entered the park that morning. Unfortunately, the FBI has had no luck locating Sonny. Locating him is crucial because he is the only eyewitness connecting the suspects to the SUV and the gun and placing them in the vicinity of the crime on that morning. They send out an all-points bulletin for him and his truck. His picture is sent to all of the Mexican border checkpoints, but he has not been located. With the two suspects remaining silent and the huge holes in the case, the investigation is growing cold. 2 weeks pass with no way to connect the suspects in custody to the murders in the house. The suspects won't agree to give statements but maintain their innocence and their ignorance of an entire family being murdered. The suspect's lawyer informs the FBI that the suspects will enter a not guilty plea and that they are preparing for a long legal battle. The FBI is desperate for any leads. They can connect the two suspects to the scene where Justin was found dead. They have pictures of the two with the SUV and can tie them to the gun pulled from the Alafai River. They can prove that the gun found in the river fired the bullet that killed Justin. There is enough evidence to show the couple is likely responsible for Justin's death, but law enforcement needs a lot more evidence to start connecting the dots to explain what happened to the rest of the Johnson family on that day. When the suspects realize the evidence is piling up against them, they task their lawyer with exploring the possibility of a deal in exchange for their cooperation. They are willing to talk about what happened that morning, but they maintain their innocence. They claim they acted in self-defense. Investigators do not know what to believe. Ultimately, law enforcement has to consider the likelihood of the suspect's story. I spoke with FBI agent Brendan Hunter, who was assigned to work the investigation. He said the idea that the suspect spent an entire night brutally murdering a family, leaving no evidence behind, and then took part in a drug deal at a park up the street from the murder, and then murdered the last remaining family member in the street after pulling away from the park, took a suspension of disbelief most of us were not capable of. He says it is common knowledge among law enforcement agencies that drug dealers do not purposely draw extra attention to their interactions, especially when a significant amount of money is being exchanged. There is growing pressure from the media and the community for answers. The town is terrified and shut down with fear. The investigators must do something to get answers. If the couple in custody did not kill the Johnson family, the murderer is slipping farther and farther away from capture. Florida state prosecutors arrange a meeting with the suspect's lawyer to discuss a way to get more information from the couple. The investigation is slowed to a stop, and investigators desperately need a new lead to follow to solve this murder case. Prosecutors are willing to disregard any charges related to drugs or the stolen SUV in exchange for information of the details of that morning and their interaction with Justin Johnson. The incarcerated couple agrees to the exchange. According to both suspects, who are questioned separately and who have not spoken to each other in weeks, each identified Justin as the aggressor. Their stories were identical. Gabriel drove the SUV out of the park that morning. The couple had a disagreement about how to get back to the highway and pulled off the road unknowingly in front of the Johnson family's home to look at a map. Once they got it figured out, they pulled back onto the road and continued on. They saw the green truck speeding up the road toward them. The man pulled the green truck out in front of them to stop them on the road that morning. He started yelling at them and accusing them of hurting his family. They had no idea what the crazy guy was talking about. They thought he must have been on drugs. After yelling back and forth a couple of times, things got out of control fast. Justin pulled out a gun and aimed it at the couple. Gabriel acknowledges he also had a gun and pulled it out, but only in self-defense. Gabriel says the kid was yelling hysterically and accusing them of all sorts of shit. The kid pulled out the gun and pointed it right at me. Only then did I pull out my gun and fire. The couple was in shock and disbelief after the altercation. Liliana wondered if the man somehow knew they had just done a drug deal and if he was some kind of redneck vigilante. Because of the money in the back and the stolen car, the couple fled. Law enforcement does not automatically believe the justifiable self-defense story. Both suspects agreed to conduct polygraph tests if they are only asked questions related to the details of the shooting and about their knowledge of the murders in the house, if any. The test results show that neither suspect had any prior knowledge of the Johnson family before Justin stopped their vehicle. They knew nothing of the Johnson house or of their murders. Even though polygraph tests are only 87% dependable, the state considers the results reliable. This new information further perplexes law enforcement. They have to consider that the justifiable self-defense story could be possible after all. The couple's story seems practical at least. The couple had just come from a drug deal. The vehicle was stolen, and they had duffel bags full of cash in the back. The couple had to leave the scene and dump the gun and the SUV. They could not stay and claim self-defense. So, could Justin have been the aggressor? The FBI had to find out. Phone records show that Justin received several unanswered calls from his sister Ellie's cell phone in the early hours of the morning on the night of the murders. Justin's baseball team had just scored a victory against their in-state rival, the Jacksonville Generals. According to his roommates, that night Justin had been celebrating the win with his teammates, and after a night of drinking had passed out about 12:30 a.m. The missed calls from Ellie's phone started around 2 o'clock in the morning. There was also one text that went through. It went unanswered as well. This was the message. A stranger is in the house, hurting Dad. Come home, please hurry. His roommates were asleep when Justin left his apartment that morning. Justin woke up, saw the missed calls and the text, and jumped into his green truck and sped home. He tried calling his mom, dad, and sister's cell phones. We don't know what Justin's mental state was on that morning. He may have still been drunk or hungover. We don't know if he was thinking clearly. All we know is that he knew his family was in trouble and he was going to get home and help them. Based on Lily and Gabriel's statements, his mood was hysterical and irrational. As Justin drove down the street to his family's home, he saw an unknown vehicle with unknown occupants driving away from his family's home. He stopped them to find out if they were the ones hurting his family. The couple, likely coming from a drug deal, were also likely on edge and paranoid. Justin pulled a gun, rapidly escalating the situation, and unfortunately, shots were fired and Justin was killed. There is no rhyme or reason to the way Justin died that morning. We can't be sure what twist of fate caused Gabriel and Lily to meet Justin on that road that morning. Like I said at the beginning of this story, the circumstances of this case are inexplicable. There is no silver lining for the Johnson family. What happened to them is unimaginable. But at least we know Justin never made it home to see the rest of his family tortured and brutally murdered. At this point in our story, law enforcement is starting to believe that Justin and his family's murder were unrelated. The FBI still has no idea what happened inside the Johnsons' home. They still have no leads. If anyone in town knew anything, they had not come forward. The first part of any murder investigation is the gathering of evidence, documenting the facts. You do not try and solve any case on the first day. You don't make any assumptions. You collect all of the evidence, just the facts. You disregard opinion and speculation. Once all possible facts are gathered, then you start to piece together or eliminate the possibilities. In this case, the forensics team took several weeks collecting evidence from the house and from the street crime scenes. An unnamed policeman in a local newspaper interview stated, "It did not look like a robbery because nothing appeared to be missing." I am going to use actual case files to describe the scene inside the Johnson home. There were 4 dead bodies in the house. The 2 adults, Amanda and Chuck Johnson, were tortured and their bodies mutilated. They were murdered last, after the children. The children were tied to their beds. They were stripped of their pajamas and had their throats slit. The adults were separated, one upstairs and one downstairs. Mr. Johnson's body was found in the couple's bedroom upstairs. He had several fingers and toes removed. They were removed with something like gardening shears. His entire headless body was bruised from being beat with a wooden baseball bat that was found in the home. He had numerous broken and crushed bones and ribs from the pre-death beating. He was beheaded and his burnt head was found on a shelf at the top of the stairs. Miss Johnson's body was mutilated and beaten like her husband's. Unlike her husband, the torture she endured seemed to focus on her reproductive organs. She was killed last. Miss Johnson was forced to listen to her family being murdered before her own death. Her burnt head was on the mantel above the fireplace. After the killer finished torturing and killing all of the family members, the killer put the heads onto a propane grill that was on the screened-in back porch of the house. The killer lit the grill and doused the heads with lighter fluid to ensure the heads were scorched unrecognizable. Then they put them back in the house. Blood from all 4 bodies was collected and smeared on all of the main walls, furniture, and counters. Bloody, headless bodies were dragged up and down hallways and stairs to ensure the home would be covered in blood. It was obvious that the killer wanted to create the most grotesque scene possible for whoever found the bodies. A message was written in blood on a mirror hung behind Amanda Johnson's body that read, "I'm the doctor." The FBI agents assigned to the investigation had never seen such a gory murder scene. Nobody could fathom what motive would possibly cause anyone to do something so horrible. The only thing they knew for sure was that the killer was a demented psychopath. When the details of the murder leaked to the locals in town, they were shocked and petrified. Fishhawk, once a place where nobody ever locked their doors, was now a town where everyone was guarded and suspicious. Families stayed home. Local bars and restaurants had no patrons. Parents dropped off and picked up their kids from school. Parks were empty. The entire town was shut down by fear. Everyone had their own ideas about who might have done it. There were rumors running rampant about everyone all over town. It was like the people in Fishhawk lost all faith in humanity. We were certain someone in town knew what happened. Perhaps it was one of our neighbors. The fear of having a killer among us grew strong. All trust between neighbors evaporated. Law enforcement looked really hard at the medical staff where Amanda worked in the hope that the "I'm the doctor" message left on the living room mirror was a confession of sorts. There was one man, a doctor named David Simmons, who the FBI took a hard look at. Dr. Dave, the name he preferred, was 47, recently divorced, and often made unfitting comments related to his availability to the women he worked with. There were reports that he had made aggressive advances toward Amanda Johnson. Amanda was a beautiful woman and was no stranger to men's attention. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Amanda and Chuck were happily married, and any attention from other men would not be taken seriously. After a couple of interrogations, Dr. Davis fleshed out to be a sometimes annoying but harmless flirt. He and everyone else working at the hospital were cleared as suspects, leaving law enforcement literally clueless and without leads. I interviewed Patricia Woodworth, who was the eyewitness on the day of Justin's murder. I asked her about what the town felt like after the murders. She said, "This area has never been the same since. Anybody who was here at the time of those murders has been emotionally affected for life. We will never think about the town the same. It's like a gloom has hung over the town ever since. For a long time, the whole town was quiet, like everyone was in mourning. I guess we felt like having fun was not allowed. Maybe it would be disrespectful to anyone who knew the family. The Johnsons were a very popular and well-liked family. The murders changed this town forever. I honestly believe the whole town has PTSD now. There are a lot of new people moving into this town, and they are breathing a new life into the town. But the longtime locals will never forget, and we will never be the same." Thank you for listening. On the next episode, the killer strikes again, and we finally meet the demented psychopath. If you like this content, please follow, share, review, or tell a friend about it. Hey, my name's Andy. You are listening to the Fishhawk Murders. This is the true story of murders that happened in my small town when I was a boy. On episode 2, we learned Justin Johnson and his family's murders were unrelated, and local man Sonny Minhas goes on the run with the drug dealer's money. Back to the investigation. The details of the deal the suspects in county jail made becomes common knowledge to the residents of Fishhawk. Everyone knows that the couple was not considered suspects in the family's murders. Although the state did believe the couple's self-defense story, officials are not prepared to let them out of jail yet. The couple is a flight risk. They sit in jail awaiting a potential trial. The police still have nothing to go on, no leads to follow, just a cold case. The town remains paralyzed with fear and suspicion. Law enforcement is embarrassed. The local news moves on. Nearby towns forget about it. Only the people of Fishhawk remember. At election time, the long-sitting county sheriff steps down due to the unsolved case. The town loses all confidence in law enforcement. Townspeople are afraid a killer will strike at any time and go unpunished. We all believe it will never be solved. Until one day in 2009 in Hackleburg, Alabama, a 38-year-old named Christopher Donald Baxter has been arrested for the murder of 42-year-old Sherry Jones Parker and her 16-year-old daughter Brittany Lynn Parker. Chris dated Sherry for a short time about a year before she was murdered. She had met him at a comedy club in Tuscaloosa in 2008. Sherry's friends said she and Chris hit it off pretty good. She liked him a lot at first. He is a stand-up comic, and he made her laugh. Chris lived across the border in Tennessee, but would drive to see Sherry often. After a couple months of dating, Sherry's friend said Sherry reported Chris as being kind of odd, and she broke it off with him. Apparently, Chris had a really weird and dark sense of humor, and he would often joke about having really rough sex and even hurting people. Sherry said his sense of humor was dry, and she really could never tell if he was joking or not. When they were dating, Chris would stay with Sherry for a few days or up to a week at a time. He spent a lot of time on her computer looking up stories about murders and murderers. He'd also go use the computers at the library near her home, often checking out the same kinds of books, unusual books, mostly about serial killers or crime stories. He said he used the books to help him with material for his comedy act. The final straw for Sherry was when he told a sexual joke about tying her daughter Brittany up. It sent chills down her spine. Chris's behavior in the bedroom began to get more unusual as well. Ultimately, the sum of all the weirdness made her break off the relationship. Her friend said that Sherry had told them that Chris still called her from time to time after they broke up, and his calls creeped her out. He often said he would drop by to see her unannounced. She asked him not to visit and to stop calling, but the calls still came. Apparently, Chris was not ready to let Sherry go. Like the Johnsons, Sherry lived with her daughter out in the country, on a country road with no neighbors close by. The Hackleburg Police Department did not catch Chris in the act of murdering Sherry. In fact, Chris was not arrested until several days after the bodies were found. On the night of August 12, 2009, according to Fire Chief Cam Alexander, Hackleburg Fire Department got the call alerting them to a fire at around 8:55 p.m. on a Wednesday night. The fire originated in the attached garage of the house. Nearby neighbors saw smoke coming up through the trees. They went to check on Miss Parker's house and saw it was engulfed in flames. Chief Alexander said 2 female bodies were found inside the home. The bodies were nearly unidentifiable. Sheriff's Department and county arson investigators worked to determine the cause of the fire and eventually positively identified the victims as Sherry and Brittany. Autopsies found that the bodies were deceased before the fire started and both women had suffered blunt object trauma to their bodies. Medical examiners were able to determine the bodies had been killed in the previous 24 hours before the fire. A murder investigation was opened and the Hackleburg PD began interviewing Sherry's family and friends. First, investigators spoke with Sherry's ex-husband, Michael Lee Parker, who was Brittany's father. Michael, who lived in the nearby town of Jasper, had an airtight alibi for the 2 days prior to the fire. He had been trying to contact his daughter Brittany for 3 days before the fire, without a response. Michael had been remarried for years, and it was said that he and Brittany's stepmom both had a good relationship with Sherry. Michael was not considered a suspect. Michael told police he had heard strange things about Chris. He was glad Sherry had broken it off with him, because he did not like him being around his daughter. Further implicating Chris was that one of Sherry's neighbors remembered seeing an orange truck with a camper shell parked on the road outside of Sherry's driveway earlier in the week. Police discovered that Chris Baxter drove a 2001 Amber Fire Pearl Coat Dodge Ram 1500 with a matching camper shell. Police went to Chris's home in Tennessee and to the Radio Shack where he worked part-time, and nobody had seen him. Chris had disappeared. Law enforcement got a warrant to search his home and put out an APB for his truck. Pictures of him and his truck were splashed all across the news in the South. If you happen to be familiar with this particular color of Dodge Ram, you'll know it sticks out. It did not take long to find Chris's truck. It was parked at a hotel in the small town of Millington, Tennessee. It's just outside of Memphis. The hotel clerk recognized the man and the truck that he had checked in earlier that day. He called the police, and when they busted into Chris's room, they found him sleeping. He was taken into custody and his truck was impounded. Chris was driven back to Alabama and questioned by the detectives working the murder investigation. When police questioned Chris, he had a 2-inch cut on his right hand and scratches on his arms and face. Chris told the police he had gotten the cuts and scratches in a bar fight on Beale Street in Memphis a few days before. Officers remembered that Chris acted as if he did not have a care in the world. He seemed to be at ease and was telling jokes to the police officers. It was as if he was doing his stand-up routine for them. He said he had not seen Sherry in a few months and offered very little else on the topic. Even though a couple of days had passed since the fire was set, the tire tracks on the dirt road where an orange truck was seen were still there and were a match with the tread on Chris's truck. Chris was the main suspect for the murders, and the witness who saw his vehicle and the matching tire tracks was enough to hold him in custody. In 2009, forensics testing turnaround times could take anywhere from 30 days to a year. In this case, the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency is able to expedite and match Chris's DNA with DNA found in Sherry's home in a record 26 days. Investigators know that Sherry had put up a fight, and the cut on Chris's hand bled onto areas of her home that the fire did not damage. Chris is on the hook for the murders. He is informed of the evidence mounting up against him. In Alabama, capital punishment is a legal penalty for first-degree murder. The state has the highest per capita capital sentencing rate in the United States. In some years, its courts impose more death sentences than Texas, a state that has a population 5 times as large. Chris's lawyer informs Chris that it is highly likely he will be convicted and sentenced to death. Chris is eager to know if the state would offer him a lesser sentence in exchange for information about other murders that he knows about. The state prosecutor, John Stevenson, figures Chris is continuing with his wannabe stand-up routine. Mr. Stevenson is not entertaining making any deals with this small-time comic. The state is going to need Chris to give them some extraordinary information to discuss taking the death penalty off of the table. The state prosecutor says he honestly never expected to get anything significant from the comic/Radio Shack worker. When Chris hears from his lawyer what the state prosecutor said, he is offended. He goes back to his cell and sulks for 2 days. The prosecution believes Chris has accepted his fate and is done joking about trying to strike a deal. On the 3rd day, Chris calls his lawyer and says he wanted to give the state some information about a murder to make a deal. Chris tells his lawyer he has information to share about a family named Johnson who were murdered in Fishhawk, Florida in 2007. So who is Christopher Baxter? It's possible that some of you may already be familiar with Chris Baxter. In fact, if you live in the southern United States, you may have even paid money to see him perform. Chris was a stand-up comedian, not a household name comic, but he worked steady traveling the comedy circuit in the South. In 2007, Chris had been doing comedy for about 12 years. Chris was raised by his mother in Memphis and never knew his father. His father met his mother while attending training for the Navy in Tennessee. His father knew Chris's mom had gotten pregnant, but didn't care. When he was finished with his military training, he left and was never heard from again. Chris and his mom did not have an easy life. They depended on her relatives a lot for support, and lived on welfare and subsidized housing for years. Chris was not a good student and often got in trouble for fighting at school. Chris's mom worked as a secretary for a roofing company and saved up enough money to buy a single-wide trailer. She moved the trailer to Chris's uncle Ron's property in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Ron owned a Radio Shack store. Over the years, Chris's mom had grown obese and she had severe health problems. She passed away from breathing and heart complications when Chris was in his 20s. He inherited a little bit of money and the trailer they lived in, which allowed him to travel and live on the small amount of money comics earn. He also worked at the Radio Shack part-time that his uncle owned. Chris had been working there since high school. When he was in town and not on the road, he would run the store for his uncle. Chris is 5'10" with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a normal build. Chris did not have any close friends. People who knew him in passing usually thought of him as a nice guy. He was always trying to get laughs from customers at the store. Chris took medication for obsessive-compulsive disorder. His uncle said Chris had always resented that his dad abandoned him. He was really competitive and always acted like he had to prove himself. After Chris's mom died, he went through a change for the worse. He really kept to himself and became secretive and more resentful. He never shared anything about his personal life, and his uncle said he knew better than to ask. He said when Chris set his mind on something, it was all he could think about. He would watch comedy DVDs for hours a day. He'd often get pissed and proclaim himself to be way better than the comics and the videos, and the headliners he worked with. Chris complained a lot because he had never scored a billing as a headliner. Chris's uncle finished by saying that he never understood why a man so upset got into stand-up comedy. It did not make a lot of sense to him. Most people agreed that he did have talent, but he was also known to be a bully on stage. A lot of his act was crowd work, making fun of audience members. He was also known to go overboard. Other comedians at the time just thought of him as a heater, a guy who comes out and warms up the crowd for the main act. Chris's onstage bullying once led to violence and got him into trouble with the law. He was arrested for simple battery after putting a drunken heckler in the hospital after one of his shows in Atlanta. He only had to pay a fine for the misdemeanor charge. Other comics remember Chris as a guy who kept to himself. He did not travel or spend a lot of time with the other performers while on the road. He preferred to work clubs in the South so he could drive his own truck to the shows. Chris was no stranger to Florida. He had performed across the state many times. In August of 2007, Chris was the opening act at a comedy club called Teasers in Tampa. He was scheduled to perform the 3rd to the 5th, Friday to Sunday, and not expected to show up for his next show in St. Augustine, Florida until the following Friday. This did put him in the Fishhawk area on the week of the Johnson's murder. The Alabama State Prosecutor has detectives look into the Johnson family murder, and detectives call the Tampa FBI and tell them they have a stand-up comic in custody for murdering his ex-girlfriend and is claiming he has information about the still open Johnson case. The FBI sends Brendan Hunter, an agent familiar with the Johnson case, to Alabama to meet with Chris to make sure whatever he claims to know is legitimate. So far, all law enforcement is able to confirm is that Chris Baxter could have been in the Fishhawk area at the time of the murders, but they need more, a lot more. Agent Hunter needs Chris to tell them something that only someone familiar with the murders would know. He needs to provide information that was not released to the public. In the case of this horrific murder, there were a lot of details still unreleased. Chris is adamant about not giving too much information about the murder until he has a signed deal, but the detective needs him to give them something before even discussing a deal. Chris tells them he will provide a little information, and if that is not enough to make a deal, then he wouldn't tell them anything more. He also states that if they make the deal, he will tell them a lot more. It's up to them to decide. I have interviewed Agent Hunter several times for this podcast, and he told me that Chris's eyes glazed over when he spoke about the murder, like he changed into a different human. Agent Hunter saw Chris through a two-way mirror tell the detectives that the little Johnson girl who was upstairs in her room at the end of the hall had been beaten so badly in the head with a ballerina trophy that the trophy had broken and a piece of it got stuck in her face. Then Chris laughs and says, "What'd you want me to do? I'm not a doctor." The Alabama detectives are taken aback and speechless. Chris perks up and smiles. He seems to be pleased with himself at the thought of causing discomfort in the two men. The detectives step out of the interrogation room and enter the observation room where Agent Hunter is. A teary-eyed detective says he can't imagine any little girl might have suffered that kind of trauma. Agent Hunter is teary-eyed as well. The detective asks him if the detail is true. Agent Hunter nods his head and says yes, it's true. He's our man. Everyone's perspective on the no-name comedian shifts in an instant. Chris is taken back to his cell, and the Alabama State Prosecutor is left with a decision to make regarding Chris's life. While the prosecution deliberates the idea of making a deal with this horrible human, Chris leaks through his lawyer that he also has information related to other unsolved murders. Chris is willing to waive his 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights and plead guilty to the murders of Sherry and Brittany Parker in exchange for life in prison. At that time, the FBI agent still had no viable leads on the Johnson murder and no way to connect Chris or anyone else to the murders. They are in favor of giving Chris the deal so they can give closure to the Fishhawk community. Ultimately, the state of Alabama weighs the cost of putting Chris on trial and all of the inevitable appeals he will likely pursue. He will likely be in prison most of his remaining life waiting on death row anyway. The state figures the benefits of making a deal with Chris are equal if not better than no deal at all. The state agrees and signs the deal. Chris's confession to the Johnson family murder gives zero doubt that he had been the murderer. His confession is accepted by the FBI, along with law enforcement agencies in Alabama. Chris Baxter, an unknown traveling stand-up comic, proved to be a psychopathic serial killer. He confesses to many other unsolved murders that occurred throughout the South over a 15-year period. Chris eventually told detectives what the doctor reference meant. It was taken from a quote from his favorite comedian, Lenny Bruce. The quote is, "I'm not a comedian, and I'm not sick. The world is sick, and I'm the doctor." His front as a stand-up comic was the perfect cover. No one ever expected him to be killing the very people he tried to make laugh. Chris killed indiscriminately. There was no demographic profile. He liked to hunt at night on country roads in small towns. Chris's motives included anger, thrill-seeking, and often involved sexual contact with the victims. This podcast does not cover Chris's other murders. As I said, I only wanted to tell the story of what happened in my town. Chris was charged and convicted of the killing of the 4 Johnson family members, and the case was finally closed. We normally think of a comic as someone who makes us laugh, someone who makes you feel better, to help us forget about our troubles. I don't think any of us could have guessed that there was a traveling psychopathic comic serial killer who was hunting and killing people after his shows. We cannot understand the mind of a serial killer, why they must hurt others. Morality means nothing to psychopaths. Their brain is malnourished, unhealthy if you will. They cannot process information like most people do. For whatever reason, one side of Chris Baxter likes to make people laugh and to please them, and another side enjoys hurting, torture, and murdering those same people. We will never understand what makes a man like that tick. We can all breathe a little easier and take solace knowing he is in prison for life and he won't have another chance to hurt any more innocent people. The family who died paid the ultimate price, and the rest of us, we lost our innocence and our belief that the world is safe and good. When decent people see the reality of what truly evil humans are capable of, it shocks them to their core. We now know there is always an element of evil lying in wait, and it can come in any form. Once the truth of the murders came out, my fellow townspeople were finally able to begin the healing process. We began to trust our neighbors again and believe in the goodness that so many of us embody. If you take anything away from this podcast, please don't let it be a distrust of entertainers or comics. The rest of us need to continue being good, decent, loving humans who stay vigilant. Before I end this podcast, I want to follow up on Sonny Minhas and the couple arrested for Justin Johnson's murder. The couple, Liliana Beltran and Gabriel Morales, stayed in jail awaiting trial until the killer Chris Baxter was caught and confessed. Law enforcement determined that the pair had likely acted in self-defense. Obtaining a conviction indicating otherwise was not guaranteed. The couple was released from jail, but not before the FBI warned them to not make any attempt to go after whoever relieved them of those duffel bags. Sonny Minhas, he was the young man who relieved them of their money. His whereabouts are still unknown. I heard he was last seen in Alaska. Law enforcement had stopped looking for him and only had ever needed him to testify as a witness. Even if I did know where he was, the details of Sonny's eventual fate are a story best left for another time. The end. If you like this content, please follow, share, review, or tell a friend about it.